On December 29, 2006, Britain finally paid off a World War II loan to the United States. The war had ended 60 years earlier. Britain had won, yet it was still paying the bill. December 29, 2006. Inside the British Treasury, a clerk processes a routine payment of $83 million to the United States Treasury. With that transaction, a file is quietly closed. Britain has officially finished repaying a loan it took in 1946. To the clerk, it's just paperwork. But behind that payment is a story far larger than accounting. The original loan was only $3.75 billion. Over time, Britain repaid more than $7.5 billion in total. And even that wasn't the true cost. Long before the loan was signed, Britain had already sold its gold and overseas investments. It handed over companies and leased away strategic military bases. When everything is added up, the total wealth transferred reaches roughly $450 billion in today's money. For comparison, the Marshall Plan cost about $200 billion in today's terms. America extracted more wealth from Britain alone than it gave to all of Europe combined. And Britain was not an enemy, it was the ally. This is the story of how the United States didn't defeat the British Empire with armies. It acquired it through debt, contracts, and financial pressure. And the system used on Britain became the blueprint for the modern global debt trap. In 1939, Britain was still the world's dominant financial power. The British Empire covered nearly a quarter of the planet. London was the center of global finance, and the pound sterling was the world's reserve currency. Britain owned railways in Argentina, mines in Chile, and factories in the United States. Its overseas investments generated hundreds of millions of dollars every year. On paper, Britain looked unstoppable, but Britain had one fatal weakness. It imported more than it exported. As an island nation, it depended on imports for food and raw materials. When war began, Germany targeted this vulnerability. U-boats sank merchant ships while ports were bombed. If Britain couldn't import, Britain would starve. To survive, Britain needed enormous supplies. Only one country could provide them at scale. That country was the United States. But America was neutral in 1939. Congress had passed strict cash and carry laws. Britain could buy supplies only if it paid cash immediately. This condition became Britain's trap. Britain needed billions in supplies but could only pay with gold, dollars, or by selling assets. All three were finite. From 1939 to 1940, Britain began bleeding wealth. Gold was shipped across the Atlantic in one of the largest transfers of physical wealth in history. American stocks owned by British citizens were seized and sold. Overseas investments were dumped at fire sale prices. These weren't just assets. They generated income that kept Britain's economy balanced. By late 1940, Britain was mathematically bankrupt. Still, supplies were desperately needed. Winston Churchill wrote to President Franklin Roosevelt and admitted the truth. Britain could no longer pay. Roosevelt understood the danger if Britain fell, but politically, he couldn't offer a direct loan. The solution was Lend-Lease. Publicly, Lend-Lease sounded generous. Roosevelt compared it to lending a garden hose to a neighbor whose house was on fire. It sounded temporary and friendly. Behind closed doors, it was something else entirely. The negotiations were led by Treasury Secretary Henry Morgenthau. His conditions were ruthless. Before America gave Britain anything, Britain had to strip itself of every asset it possessed. American officials demanded full access to Britain's financial books. Britain was treated like a bankrupt company, not an ally. One major target was American Viscose, a U.S. manufacturing company owned by a British firm. It generated millions in income for Britain. Morgenthau demanded it be sold. Britain resisted, warning the sale would be devastating. Morgenthau issued an ultimatum: sell the company or lose Lend-Lease. Britain had no choice. The company was sold at roughly half its real value. The money went straight back to the U.S. Treasury. At the same time, Britain desperately needed destroyers to fight U-boats. America offered 50 outdated ships. In return, it demanded 99-year leases on British bases. Those bases stretched across the Caribbean and Atlantic. They gave America strategic dominance over the Western Hemisphere. Britain surrendered them to survive. Only then did Congress approve Lend-Lease. Publicly, America became the arsenal of democracy. Privately, Britain was being dismantled. Hidden in the agreement was Article 7. Britain agreed to eliminate discriminatory trade practices after the war. This meant dismantling imperial preference. Imperial preference held the British Empire together. Signing its removal was economic suicide, but the alternative was immediate starvation. From 1941 to 1945, Lend-Lease kept Britain alive. Without it, Britain would likely have surrendered, but the cost was enormous. While Britain produced only weapons, American corporations expanded globally. Markets Britain abandoned were captured by U.S. companies. The wealth transfer accelerated. By 1945, Britain's gold was nearly gone. Overseas investments had been liquidated. Strategic bases were in American hands. Then the war ended. Japan surrendered in August 1945. 7 days later, the United States terminated Lend-Lease. The cutoff was immediate. Ships carrying food to Britain were ordered to turn back mid-Atlantic. Britain collapsed overnight. Its economy was built entirely for war. Britain imported half its food, all paid for with American dollars. Those dollars were suddenly gone. Facing starvation, Britain had one option. It begged for an American loan. John Maynard Keynes went to Washington. Keynes asked for a grant, arguing Britain had saved Western civilization. America offered a loan instead. The amount was $3.75 billion. The loan came with harsh conditions. The most dangerous was sterling convertibility. Britain had to make its currency exchangeable for dollars. Keynes warned this would cause a run on the pound. He was ignored. The condition was enforced. Within weeks, countries rushed to exchange sterling for dollars. Nearly 20% of the loan vanished in just over a month. Britain was humiliated. The loan was never forgiven. For 60 years, Britain paid. Through crises and political changes, the checks continued. The final payment was made on December 29, 2006. Britain had won the war, yet it paid for 60 years, and the loan was only the visible debt. When gold sales, lost investments, trade destruction, and base leases are counted, the total reaches $450 billion. That was the real price of survival. What happened to Britain wasn't unique. It was the prototype, a system later imposed on dozens of countries. At Bretton Woods, the U.S. built a dollar-dominated financial system. The IMF and World Bank enforced it. Loans came with conditions. Privatization, currency convertibility, and market opening followed. American institutions benefited. Debtor nations weakened. Germany lost the war and was rebuilt. Britain won the war and paid for decades. The empire wasn't conquered. It was foreclosed. And the system that stripped Britain still operates today. The mechanism never changed, only the countries did.